Hello, and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining what I think will be a highly insightful and thought provoking digital dialogue where we're going to explore the concept of cohesion as a critical success factor for transformation. I'm Wendy Keene, a fellow with the Institute for Digital Transformation, and I would like to invite my esteemed colleagues, Roger and Doug, to join me. Roger, let's meet you first.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm super happy to be here today. I'm somebody who just hates it when things don't work, especially as a consumer. And as somebody who started out in life as an industrial engineer, I can't go anywhere without finding things that don't work and how things can be better, to the bane of my children. So I run a consulting group called Process Renewal Group, where we just try to get processes right and all the other capabilities to make things work. But they got to work together. That's my passion in life.
That's right. Indeed. Welcome, Roger. And let's invite Doug to join us as well. Doug.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you and Roger today. I was on the core team of a company that was a self-managed company, human-centric, and grew from zero to $1 billion company based on simple key principles that honored the realities of human beings and their desires for agency, autonomy, and freedom. And from there, I became a consultant, and now I have my own firm, D'Artagnan Advisors. I do organizational consulting, write books, and do speaking all across the USA and all around the world.
Amazing. Welcome to you both. And thank you again for sharing all of your time and wisdom so generously with us today. So I'll give a little bit of a backdrop on the conversation, and then let's get the dialogue going. I think when people think about transformation or digital transformation, perhaps words come to mind like technology, data, agility, innovation, and change. But there's this really important word that we don't always think about, but it's the one that makes everything work, which is cohesion, that we're going to be talking about here today. That is, I think, the force that underpins transformation. And it's what brings together the people, the process, the technology, and more into an integrated whole that is greater than the sum of its parts and is able to actually deliver on strategy and deliver the value that we intend. It's cohesion that turns strategy into reality and, if you will, makes music out of the orchestra. And so what I think this means is that architecture, design, operations are as important as strategy, right? Strategy, execution are interlocking, and it doesn't matter how brilliant a strategy is if we can't get it into action. But of course, cohesion is not something that happens by accident. We need to be intentional and design it in. So that's what we're going to explore today. And let's get this dialogue started. So Roger, let's start with you if we could, because you and I have been exploring and clarifying this concept of cohesion. So what is cohesion?
Yeah, well, maybe I can talk about what isn't cohesion. And I think the opposite of cohesion is fragmentation. And I think that most of us are quite used to that we solve point problems, that things just don't work together. And all you have to do is be a consumer of so many organizations today to realize when things aren't working. And it might be because the technology hangs you up. It could be because the person you're talking to on the phone or in a chat doesn't really understand, or you're talking to the wrong person and they hand you off to something else. Now, maybe these days we're going to have an agentic AI agent hand you off to another agentic AI agent who doesn't know what you're talking about. But there's this lack of doing what just makes sense if you just step outside the organization and look at it. And the funny thing here is that when things are cohesive, in my experience, you don't even notice it. But you have to be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. Mm-hmm. So many people, well-intentioned, trying to do the right thing, but it's just not connecting. And as you mentioned, I think that the critical issue here is your processes have to work. You have to have the right technical and human competencies and capabilities. Your data has to have integrity. You can't have me in 10 databases and expect to get things working. Now, the funny thing is, in my opinion, all this stuff is common sense. But I think where we go wrong is we're not intentional, as you mentioned. We need to be intentional with the vision, have a cohesive vision for how everything works together. And then the hard part, getting everybody who's responsible for all the bits to work together with one common vision, one common result, one common outcome, and one common motivation for everybody who needs to do it. So my view is cohesion, there's a lot of different parts, but they all have to be cognizant of one another. And they all have to be designed understanding that maybe my part of it is not as perfect as I'd like it to be, but overall it works.
That's right. Beautiful. Love it. And that intent, that vision, and we'll come to mindset and some things like that later. I think very, very well said. Doug, what is cohesion? What would you say?
So I studied the word last night in some dictionaries, and I also looked at the word coherence. And some dictionaries consider those two words synonyms. Others say you can have coherence without cohesion, and some other tangents. But I like Roger's framing of the opposite. So Roger's opposite is fragmentation. I might call the opposite of cohesion incoherence. Something doesn't make sense. And my starting point, rather than the organization, is always the human being. So what do human beings need in order to function in the world, to function in organizations, to create value for other human beings? There's really only eight human needs. Every business in the world that's ever existed or ever will existed is designed to serve one or more of those 8 human needs. You got food, clothing, shelter, the big 3, and then communication, transportation, entertainment, personal security, and healthcare. And what's your business? Who is your customer? And how are you going to create an organization where human beings have enough space to be creative? Because the need to create is as fundamental to human existence as the need for air and water. So we need to be able to create organizations that liberate human beings to build relationships, to acquire resources, and to do their best work. And so that's kind of my mission. And that's what coherence is all about, coherence with human needs.
Beautiful. And bringing it back to this human again and again, which we've always needed, but more than ever today, I think with AI, we really need. So coherence as a concept, which we'll unpack more, but we've set the intent, we've set the vision. What's in it for organizations? What are benefits of cohesion to organizations? How does it improve transformational outcomes? Or conversely, organizations that you've seen without cohesion, what are the challenges? How does it limit their performance? Doug?
Well, an organization without cohesion may have certain strengths, but it may be like a midget with one mighty right arm, but unable to handle all the aspects of cohesion, which have to do with human beings. I like some of the work that Ken Wilber has done with his all quadrants, all levels model, and we have to be able to balance for cohesion the internal and the external, and the individual and the collective. So we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and to handle all of those aspects and optimize all of those things in order to have cohesion. So the external collective is most of what we think about as business. It's strategy, it's processes, systems, technology, markets, regulation, tech, all the rest of that stuff. But the way we implement strategy is with culture. And that's our collective tacit understandings that guide behavior in organizations. And culture is built up of individuals who have individual motivations that have to be taken into account. And then what are the capacities and competencies of those individuals? And can they actually deliver the strategy that we envision for a desired future state. So it's really important to have a really broad, holistic view of cohesion of all these elements and be able to deliver on all of them in order to have a cohesive organization.
Roger?
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think that the issue here is I see it so many times that people, they take a point or very narrow view of what's taking place. Like just the name digital transformation itself is sort of gives away some of that people, they think if they just get the systems to connect, they'll be okay. But the whole human side, it's not something we should be doing as part of implementation. It's something we should be doing as part of strategy and design. And so we need to. It's one sort of business system. It's one value stream. It's one set of things. And the interesting thing about that is the outsiders couldn't care less about your internal structure. They just know whether it's working for them or not working for them. And you know, if I don't get all of it working together, if I don't start with the idea that I have a vision for how all the parts work, then I'm going to fail. Last year, I bought an electric car, just as an example. And with my electric car, I thought, well, this is fantastic. You know, the place I live put in chargers and stuff like that. So good timing. So one of the things I realized afterwards, when one small component failed because they rushed the car to market, right? When one small component failed, the whole car failed. And my daughter had the car at the time and she was driving it somewhere and got stranded. But it was because one little component, which controls all the other stuff which works, it didn't work, so nothing worked. And I think that we have that with our organizations today. Our customers are not as loyal as they used to be because we're not reliable. We can't be trusted because, and they don't care why that is. They don't care if it's your org chart, your system, you name it, 1,000 other things, your business rules, your data. That stuff all has to work together because there's so much complexity now. We can't design components and slap them together and hope it all works. So I learned that from that car, from that car example. They did fix the car ultimately.
And Roger, I think you mentioned an important thing with complexity, right? Complexity of, you know, parts in products like you're talking about, of organizations, especially ones that have been around a long time, you know, supply chains from all around the world. We're so interconnected. So just curious for one or both of you, like how urgent is this? Because it feels like complexity is as much of a challenge almost as competition. Like, just how does this play out for companies?
Well, maybe I can just have a quick first stab at that. I'm sure that Doug has some great things to say about it too. I actually think, like, one of the things I did, to the great chagrin of my children when they were younger, is I took a trip to England and I studied the Industrial Revolution sites. This was their vacation. They said, "Thank you, Dad." No, they didn't say that. But anyway, but one of the things I realized there is that transformation took a lot longer than people thought. But it was a foundational transformation. You couldn't say, "I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go back." It was there. You're going to go there. We've been going through another one with information technology. I actually think we're on the verge of another one, which is, I would maybe call the knowledge revolution. That now we have all the knowledge we need, but that knowledge has to be working together. And that's where AI and stuff like that comes in. But it's got to work together. It can't be slapped on top. We got to rethink how we do things. And I think people who are architects or designers or analysts have got to start thinking about designing for how the pieces fit, not just designing the pieces.
Amazing. Doug, anything you would add?
Well, I completely agree with Roger's analysis and would add that a huge challenge in organizations today is the pathology of bureaucracy. So Gary Hamel and Mikkel Zanini have done work in this, and they've identified what they call the management tax, and that's the cost of excess bureaucracy. They estimated that a few years ago at about $3 trillion a year in the U.S. alone. That's like 1/7 of the entire U.S. economy. And it's more than a financial and economic cost, it's a moral cost. We're literally wasting people's lives performing work that does not matter and does not create value in the world. And so we're at a bit of a crossroads with technology. And, it's not just AI, we have blockchain, artificial or virtual reality, nanotechnology, robotics, genetic engineering. Now we have 4D printing beyond 3D printing. So it's AI, and it's the convergence of all these new technologies that is creating such enormous pressure and complexity on organizations. And so we're at a crossroads. Are we going to use this technology to double down on bureaucracy and add more managers, as California has done in the last 5 years? Or are we going to use this technology to augment human effort and give people more agency and autonomy and ability to be creative and to innovate? The evidence is unclear at the moment which direction we're going in. Obviously, I favor more agency. And the other thing I'd say is that one approach to managing enormous complexity in organizations is to focus on core principles. So the company I mentioned that I helped start here in California some 35 years ago is called Morningstar. Essentially started with 2 core principles: don't use force, keep commitments. And those principles essentially represented the entire governance of the enterprise for many years and are still in place. And really are the key to allowing the organization to grow from 0 to become now the largest tomato processor in the entire world. And I believe everybody listening to this call has consumed Morningstar product at this point in time. And it's governed by 2 simple core principles, which allow it to handle enormous complexity, handling plant genetics and meteorology and thermodynamics and a number of complex disciplines in order to bring products to the world. And so simplicity governing great complexity is important, I think.
Amazing. And that pathology of bureaucracy you're mentioning, in the number behind that makes an unbelievable case, I think, to be intentional about managing these things. And we are at that point, right? We are at that point. So we'll take a question here. Roger, one for you. I know you've already thought about this.
Yeah, it's interesting. The question pops up, and I recognize Brianne right away. We have met before, more than once. Yeah, I think so. Brianne said, "What about culture and how into all of this?" I think that one of the things I notice is when people say, "What's the biggest reason why some of this stuff doesn't work?" and I am convinced it's that all the people who are responsible for big chunks of the organization, for functions, for example, are all measured on competing outcomes. So I've got salespeople, they're measured on volume of sales. I've got customer service people, and they're measured on customer satisfaction. And I got other people looking at supply chain efficiencies and all this stuff. But no one other than the CEO is responsible for the outcomes of value to the people who receive our goods and services. There's a huge, huge, huge misalignment. And I think that is, it shows up in measurements and targets, but it really shows up in behaviors of people. And if I understand Doug well, that you're not going to have the right culture if each individual has a different set of behaviors and a different set of motivations. I really think this is part of it. But as I said before, I don't think you can add this on top of at the end of your digital transformation, by the way, that assumes you have budget left and there's enough time, you don't have a deadline, and you can't, and there's no time to do it, which is also what happens. It's got to be designed in from the get-go. And this is why we say it's got to be cohesive. Cohesive just means it works together. It sticks together. Or you can take 2 extra years to do your digital transformation and it still doesn't work the way you want to, right? So it costs more, it costs money, it takes time, it upsets people, you lose your good people, they go somewhere else. There's so many consequences of not being cohesive, in my opinion. Exactly. And culture's in that loop.
Doug, anything to add?
Totally agree with Roger, and just add that the way you implement strategy, the channel or the vehicle for implementing strategy is culture. So if you're not cohesive enough to pay attention to creating a healthy culture, then your successful strategy is going to be very, very elusive.
Right on. We welcome many more questions, so keep them coming. In the meantime, Roger and Doug, how do we recognize if an organization has cohesion? Like, what does this look like? Characteristics or hallmarks? How does a cohesive organization think and act? And maybe even not overall, but in certain pockets. Roger?
Okay, I have a quick go at it. It's really interesting. I think it's easier to look at the what John Zachman's famous line is, what is the cost of nonconformance? In other words, what does it cost you to not be cohesive? And if I could do, like, even just for transformation itself, if I could get that done with and have all the pieces fit and working together, maybe I can finish on time rather than dragging those people out an extra year. Maybe I can do 2 transformations next year rather than 1. Maybe I can get to market sooner and have the benefit show up while it's still valuable in market before it goes away and gets replaced by something else. So I think that I think you can see it in things like cost overruns. You can see it in things like customer complaints, or if they complain at all. You can look at your retention rate. Like, you can go to a lot of your fairly typical KPIs. Now, the problem is, if I have one of those KPIs, I can't prove it. I can't prove it was a problem of lack of cohesion. But when I have cohesion and it all works, I also can't prove it was because we had cohesion. It's one of those hard to measure directly.
Right. Doug, what is good like?
Yeah, I sense cohesion when I see people having fun, when I see smiles on their faces, when people are enjoying themselves at work, when they have healthy camaraderie with each other and great working relationships. That represents a signal that cohesion exists, because, as Drucker said, the purpose of an organization is to find a customer and to create value. And if you're doing that, you're probably having fun. And ways to measure that: you can measure happiness, you can measure trust, you can measure basic human components. But to me, that's a signal that cohesion exists.
Love it. So between you've literally like lit up everything: cost, retention, customer, agility, happiness. Yeah, trust. Roger?
Yeah, I was going to just comment on Doug's point that for me, I wouldn't go into an organization and look for people having fun. I would look for people having fun who are delivering results, because people can be having fun, but the company is going nowhere. It's not really doing things. So I think it's an outcome or a byproduct of all these other things, but it's a marker for sure.
Indeed. Well, so I have to ask, what are the root causes behind lack of cohesion? Is it just the structures we've put in place for so many years, as you were talking about, bureaucracy, Doug? Just why does it exist?
Well, I think one cause is that people are wired neurologically to seek power and acquire power and retain power. So how do we know this? Well, Ian Robertson wrote a book called The Winner Effect: How Power Affects Your Brain. and he describes how people get a shot of dopamine when they exercise command authority over other human beings. And so that's how people become literally addicted to power. And once you acquire power and taste for power, why would you want to give that up? That's something that the people are wired for. Dr. Keltner, a psychologist at University of California, Berkeley, and his graduate students also studied the dynamics of power. And some of the artifacts of power acquisition include reduced sense of manners and etiquette toward other people. And so it's quite interesting what the dynamics of retaining power over other people are. And so the way to confront that and to overcome that is to focus on principles. Because if you have a principle of not using force, that means that you have actually removed the artifact of command authority. That means everything must be accomplished through request and response. And while people do have an obligation to respond to requests, and no one has any authority to tell another person what to do. And so structurally, organizationally, we can create systems and organizations that eliminate the exercise of power over other human beings and create that space for people to exercise their agency and autonomy and do their best work.
Brilliant.
My answer is a bit more structured than that. And I'm going to blame the management schools. I'm going to blame, with all due respect to all of you out there who've got MBAs, I've only seen like 2 places in the world that actually teach cross-functional management. Otherwise, you learn accounting, finance, you learn marketing, you learn maybe supply chain is the closest you get to that cross-functional aspect of it. But the customers of our organizations, when they come in and go click on our website, they don't know what happens after that, but they don't care what happens after that. They only care what happens when that product or that service shows up at the door, right? But behind all that piece of work goes all over the place, can involve 100 people or 3 or 4 or 5 different departments. And each of those departments are designing for themselves. No one is designing for the flow of work that has to go all the way through. And the incentives and the performance management dashboard scorecards are all built for that functional piece. No one is teaching cross-functional management. And today, our customers expect all that stuff to just to work properly. And so and it comes back to the issue that Doug's talking about. If like it's how do you connect the dots across the organization to deliver the outcomes? And do people 10 steps in, do they even know what the outcome is supposed to be? And so that I come back to the issue. I think it's misalignment, and maybe with digital transformation, it's starting to happen because you have to start connecting the dots. And the other thing I think is now with AI entering into those workflows, AI is not going to replace the workflow. It's going to be a part of the workflow. But with AI coming to those workflows, maybe I don't need as much hierarchy, Doug. This is a good question for you. Like, I really believe that the type of thing we're talking about, which is what people naturally want, if we use AI properly, then AI will enable the flattening of the organization and the connecting of things from left to right rather than top to bottom.
Doug, please, we'd love to hear you comment on that.
No, that is absolutely the hope, Roger, that AI will be an augmenting agent that will connect dots and help us level up organizations so that we optimize workflows and de-optimize hierarchies of power. That's absolutely the hope. The challenge, again, is that with this desire for power on the part of many people who are higher up in the hierarchy, are they going to deploy AI in a way that that reinforces and concretizes the hierarchies of power so that they can essentially control people more rigidly than ever before? We saw this in Disney at one point. They had what they called the electronic whip, and they had like a leaderboard for maids and how fast they would clean hotel rooms at Disneyland, and they were creating enormous stress and terrible employee relations, and many organizations are moving in that direction. So how do we get them to shift to a more agentic augmentation mode? That's a huge challenge for a time.
And I would think in a situation like that if the people working in your hotels in the happiest place on earth
True. Yeah.
are not members of the happiest cohort, then I always say, I know when I'm talking to a disgruntled employee. It takes me about 5 seconds, and that's about it. I can smell it, I can feel it, and it doesn't help the customer end of it. So this whole, like, all the stuff we're talking about, it flows all the way through. It becomes part of the fabric of the organization, and it's a whole new mindset. Maybe, Wendy, I know you're going to get the mindset, but it's a whole new mindset. It's not just a series of activities. Yeah, I've got to get my data right. I've got to get my processes right. I've got to, get my user interface working and like all that kind of stuff. But it's something. It's like if we can do the human side, the technology side will fit in and make sense. I don't think they're separate things. I think it's one fabric.
Yep. And that mindset so resonates with me too, as what you both said before. And Roger, you were talking about management systems. I do think that is a part of it, right? Because we aren't taught cross-functional management, let alone, doing it in our organizations. I also think it goes back even earlier to our education. It's very fragmented. Science is here, English is there, math is there. And, even just as children, to be taught to be, holistic and thinking about the whole and thinking about what it means to be a good citizen, taking care of, my goals, but also contributing to the whole, I think is something. So Doug, maybe just a little bit more on the organizations. I wonder if you could paint a little bit of the power of the possible around like self-management and what, some of the things you've seen and created in organizations. What is possible?
So it's possible to create organizations that are designed as networks of competence rather than hierarchies of power. So we took the agreements between peers at Morningstar several years ago and had them digitized and photographed in three-dimensional space. And essentially it represented a large spider web. And if it were a time-lapse movie, it would be in constant motion as people negotiate and renegotiate roles and responsibilities as autonomous agents. People who are organized around clear principles with a clear mission and desire to serve the customer in mind can operate as networks of competence. And these networks are incredibly robust and powerful. I shared the photograph that I just described with a biotech executive, and he said, "You know what? That org chart reminds me of a molecule because it's the goal in biotech is to make the connections between the nodes, which in our case are individual contributors, less toxic." Yes, we agree with that. And to make the covalent bonds between the molecules stronger. Yes, we believe that. That's coherence. That's collaboration. That's teamwork. That's ethical design. And so networks are the vision of the future that many people are gravitating toward, the visionary leaders that see the potential there. There are companies around the world that are starting to organize in such a way. One of the biggest organizations, biggest experiments in the world right now is the Bayer Company, with about 100,000 employees based in Europe. And they've had some challenges in the marketplace with patents expiring and other things, but they are organizing around self-managed teams, creating value for ultimate customers. And so networks are really powerful.
Amazing. Roger, anything to add?
No, I think that it just makes, you see, the interesting thing for me here is that we just stepped out of our current paradigm and said, what makes sense? I think this just makes sense. And the other thing I think is also really quite important about it, and Doug sort of hinted at it a bit there, and that is that you might say, oh, well, this stuff sounds really good, but the world changes too fast. We can't possibly do all this. It'll take too long. I actually think this is more self-healing, that you can adapt more readily because you have people who are close to the action and know what's going on, who can adapt and adjust and change those interrelationships at when they need to change, as opposed to wait for a 3-year transformation project. And then you put it all in place, and then somebody else comes along with something different that we didn't anticipate, and it's all out the window again. So it's got to be more organic as opposed to big bang. Now we may have to do a big mindset switch in the organization, or maybe we have to start small somewhere and just various places. I think that getting it all together is challenging. Like I have CIOs who are looking at some of these ideas, we're experimenting with them, but their fear is that everybody expects them to put this new system out by January 1st, as opposed to help the organization be more effective by maybe March or something like that. So, but focusing on one thing, there's always that issue. What I want to know as an architect is that if I touch that, I want to know everything else that might move. When I pull that string, is there another thing moving over there? Otherwise, all I'm going to do is reinforce one of the things I see all the time, and that is that the main cause of problems is solutions. Mm-hmm. Right? Indeed. We self-perpetuate all the issues we're facing, and so many of the things we're facing, even with digital transformation now, because we didn't think that way 20 years ago when we did all this. We didn't think about this stuff has to connect together. We built these little things, and then we try to glue them together. And it's just unwieldy. And so it starts with rethinking. It starts with recognizing your fragmentation. Yeah. Then it starts with rethinking your vision. Then it talks about, well, then what's our plan? What's our architecture for how these things actually fit together? Yeah. And I think it brings the need in for a different kind of business architect than what we've seen before to help pull that together.
In a whole different way to look at organizations, right? I love this network model and this word organic you used, and it is just so good for the human. It's not only good for outcomes, it's good for the humans who are in a more empowered, I think, more valuable position. And just the fact that it's kind of structured around patterns of nature tells me this is intelligent. Well, again, for all of you joining us, we welcome questions and comments. Keep them coming. Roger, Doug, let's talk about action and moving into, some practical action on these brilliant ideas that you're sharing. So how can organizations build cohesion? What are practical steps? Where do we start? Just what would your recommendations be? Roger?
Well, and it's interesting. I'm working with an organization right now they're a transit corporation. They run rapid transit, the above ground rail type. They run buses. They run ferries. They run so many different things. But each one of those technologies, if you want to call them that, is in a different company underneath a corporate umbrella. So what we're looking at now is we're saying, okay, we'd love to make all these changes happen realistically. And by the way, all of those companies are highly unionized with long-term agreements, which are hard to undo. So we're looking at saying, this is great, but how realistic is it for us to be able to do that kind of stuff? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of bring it together more through good practice than anything else. So whereby each of those 4 organizations, they can't do as they do now. They all pitch projects. They don't have any sort of architecture per se. They all pitch projects. They don't say how it all comes together. And maintenance for the bus company should be very similar to the maintenance for the train company, even though they went out and bought 2 different systems 5 years ago. But my point here is that some things are hard to do, but what we're trying to do is change the planning process and the prioritization process and the actual building of capabilities which can be shared across multiple value streams. So we're using the architecture that identifies where all that stuff is. So we're trying to start with that knowledge map of where everything is and what it all means. And if we're going to invest, $50 million in something new, I don't want to do it twice because I got one's rail and one's buses, right? See what I'm saying? And so it's so we're just trying to start with some common sense about, can we improve our planning process? Mm-hmm. Can we improve our resource allocation to defining the right projects? Can we get sharing across these organizations? Well, first of all, that's got to be politically possible, which comes back to, how do we measure those executives? That's not going to change this year, but I can do some other things this year. But we've got to get something going, at least being able to provide the knowledge about, if you do this, it's going to cost this much more. It's going to take this much longer. We're going to have 2 versions of everything. And by the way, I've got people's names on both of those databases. Try to bring some sanity to it by basically being aware. So we're starting with, are we aware of what's really going place? And then can we gradually create a common intention?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And, also thinking back to what's the root cause of lack of cohesion, Roger, you sort of bring up a lack of a shared view of the organization, right? So in your case, you're kind of using this value stream capability construct to bring people together. They can kind of see it in their minds. Doug, how do we move into action?
Well, for me, it starts with the current leader or leaders. If you think about philosophy, one of my best friends, Peter Kestenbaum, passed away last year at the age of 96. He was one of the greatest leadership experts and philosophers of all time, and applied his philosophy to business. And he had a famous article in Fast Company magazine in 2000 where 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗶 interviewed him. And the title of the article was, "Do You Have the Will to Lead?" So human beings have free will. And does a leader have a vision of a desired future state into which he or she can invite people to follow on a path toward? And if that doesn't exist, probably the organization's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to keep doing what it does. But if a leader has this vision, then what does the invitation look like? And noodling this around with some colleagues over the last couple of years, I think the invitation looks something like an all-company meeting, or maybe meeting with all the top leaders and all the top influencers throughout the organization for 2 or 3 days, where the leader, the CEO, delivers a keynote of invitation, and then the organization breaks up into small groups, and they spend 2 or 3 days in open space and networking and collective intelligence, and wrapped up with coaching and assessments. And at some point, people break up and start to brainstorm experiments for which individuals can take full accountability and run over the next 6 to 12 months, with reports, regular reports on the success or non-success of those experiments. Feed the ones that work, kill the ones that don't work. Consistent, coherent, cohesive iteration toward the desired future state that was the source of the original invitation. So if you're going to move a big org, I think you have to do something like that in order to get it going, because just announcing that this is our transformation, this is what we're going to do, doesn't really get the job done anymore. You have to involve people in the transformation at all levels.
So Doug, let me ask you a question on that. can we use as one of those experiments the actual transformation project itself as a much more peer-to-peer, integrated, cohesive, all the pieces fit together. We can identify what those pieces are. Let's make sure we know how one affects on the other, including all the human side of it. What a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Roger. And that's the beauty of the approach, is that you're embracing the real power of a network, which is the tapping of collective intelligence. My friend Rod Collins just wrote a book called "Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody," and the power of collective intelligence is strong and severely underutilized in most organizations, and yet it's an incredible resource that we can tap and should tap to do exactly what you described.
Mm-hmm. I love this approach. It is just leadership, courage, vision, and co-creation, I think, at its best.
And good structure.
And good structure.
It's not just a free-for-all. I think that's the thing that I remember when it was the year 2000, 2001 maybe, when I went to visit Doug in his office when he was still there. And I said, I don't understand this. Who's your boss? Who do you report to? And he literally, Doug, you won't remember this. He literally stood me up, walked me to the window, pointed to the people loading tomato paste on trucks and said, I work for them.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I know we're starting to near the end of our hour together. So maybe one last question, and then we'll do some closing comments. We've talked a lot about culture, and we've talked a lot about mindsets. So what would we recommend to leaders in terms of shifting that mindset and culture, and where else do we start?
Well, I think there's always this issue of structure and culture. What comes first, right? And so I do believe that we're not going to change the culture if we keep incentivizing people on parts of the solution and not sharing collectively the result of the whole solution. Because people aren't stupid. They know how they're measured and so on. And I think you do have to address what people are measured on, and whether or not at least some portion of that can be a shared portion to get started. But without that, it's hard to sort of get the mindset the mindset going. But I also think that like in my experience, a lot of the people I work with, the executives, my clients, they're afraid of this because they don't know how to do it. Right? They don't know how to be collaborative. They're so used to the power rise, and the ones who got there probably left a few bodies behind along the way. I think the idea that some coaching and helping people to do this. I'm finding most of my work these days is just coaching my clients to what to do, how to think about it. Have you thought about it this way? They're just gradually nudge, as opposed to big bang. I'm going to change your attitude overnight.
Yeah, indeed. Doug?
Yeah, so I'll go back to business schools. I've talked to business schools for the last 14 or 15 years, and I actually detect a little bit of a trend toward more openness to the idea of cohesion and better holistic approaches to processes and systems and culture and design than I did 15 years ago. For example, this fall, I was able to speak to Pepperdine University's Master of Science in Organizational Development cohort reunion, and they were extraordinarily open to these ideas. In fact, we talked about a white paper that one of their students had produced called Love as an Organizational Norm. And she'd actually introduced that into a telecom that she was working in at one point. And it's about really caring, kindness, compassion, nurturing, support, encouragement, and empathy for one's fellow workers and customers and suppliers. And so that experience of speaking to them led to other conversations with other business schools who are now open to this idea of greater cohesion. And so I see flowers blooming in the educational sector. And it's really a matter of introducing these ideas to the executive suite and finding those leaders who can envision a desired future state and are willing to open up the organization to this idea of more network design and tapping into collective intelligence.
Well,
Wendy, if I can just add a quick thing to this. This is all wonderful, but we might sound like we're delusional to some of the people who are listening in. I really do believe there's going to be casualties. Again, if I go back to my study of the Industrial Revolution, 3/4 of the companies during the Industrial Revolution didn't make it because they couldn't make the transition, and so I think the same thing here. There are going to be winners, there are going to be losers, and I think the winners are going to be the ones who are better connected to the outside world. All the pieces work together, and they've got the attitude so they can actually change quickly and so on. It's a different model, and I think with AI and things like that coming along, we have the opportunity to make this move. It's not just figuring out what to use AI on.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. It's like competition is not our only concern. It's this coherence and this complexity, especially for large organizations, right? We are in a whole different world. And I think you're right. There will be casualties for those that can't rally. Well, I have to say, this conversation has been so inspiring for so many reasons. And I feel like we can really, with intent, design a different type of future for ourselves. And there is momentum already going that way. And some of the things we've discussed, should we continue to capitalize them? So just briefly, closing comments, and then we'll wrap for today. So Doug, let's start with you first. Any last thoughts?
Last thoughts are we're starting to empirically detect the elements of success. Roger described, we're going to have casualties, and we are, but we'll also have successes. And so the successes will probably be the organizations that preference networks over hierarchies of power, that preference adaptive mindsets over rigid, brittle, KPI-driven performance, and that preference customer focus over short-term profits. And the Lisbon principles that were just adopted this year in Portugal and signed by 20 or so executives and CEOs support that evolution. And I think that describes the future. We're going to have casualties, but we'll also have great successes like NVIDIA, and Boeing is lagging way behind because they haven't really caught on yet.
Incredible. Roger?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to maybe take the opposite side because it maybe not be represented well enough, and that is that the structural side. I think that, like my car that failed because one of the pieces didn't work, but it messed up all the other parts. We've got to know how the pieces work together, and it's remarkable. Despite all this change we're talking about, quite honestly, our data structures really don't need to be changing. Our value streams and processes really are very similar. Our capabilities are going to last, at least in name or in structure. So let's get a bunch of stuff stable so we don't have to worry about it. But that means good business architecture, not just architecture so I can build systems. Beyond all of that stuff.
Architecture for design. That's right.
Right. Business design.
Indeed. Well said. Gentlemen, thank you so much for generously sharing your time, your insights with all of us. I think this was an unbelievable conversation and tremendously insightful for everyone listening. And thanks to everyone who joined us and listens later. We wish you all the best and happy holidays as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining Digital Dialogue. Look for more episodes at noon Eastern Time on most Tuesdays of every month. Can't join the live session? You can watch the replay anytime on our YouTube channel.